This is a demonstration of problem S2A, preparing a trial balance. Samson Floor Coverings reported the following summarized data at December 31st, 2024. The accounts appear in no particular order and all have normal balances. And the problem asks us to prepare the trial balance of Samson Floor Coverings at December 31st, 2024. So first let's talk about what we are trying to do when we prepare a trial balance. All that a trial balance is just listing all of the accounts with their balances to see whether our debit balances equal our credit balances, and that has to be true before we do adjusting entries and before we prepare the financial statements. So it's not a financial statement, but it is a necessary step because we don't want to go forward with adjusting entries or with our financial statements if we aren't in balance. Now, when you work one of these problems, especially when you're new and you haven't had very much experience with it and the accounts are all mixed together, you need to go through and identify what each account actually is, so that you can put them in the right order. Remember that on the trial balance, we want to start out with our assets, then our liabilities, owner's equity, and those are going to be your permanent accounts, and then you have dividends, your revenue, and then your expenses. That's the order that you put them in the trial balance. And if we had a real accounting system, these would also have numbers and they would be numbered, and those numbers would also help you to put them in the right order. Now, when you're new at this and you haven't got much experience, sometimes it's good just to go ahead and write out beside each one of them what type of account they are. If you're not sure, like you can tell this is a revenue account, but do you know that equipment is an asset account? You can see this is an expense account, but do you know that common stock is an owner's equity account, and accounts payable is a liability account, and dividends is our first temporary account, and then salaries payable is a liability. Salaries expense is an expense account. A lot of students get these confused in the beginning, but if it says payable, it's a liability. If it says expense, it's a temporary expense account. Cash is an asset, accounts receivable is an asset, interest payable is a liability, and utilities expense is an expense. And then after you get each one of them labeled, then you can go over and you can put your accounts in, and then you'll be ready to enter their balances in either the debit column or the credit column. So to save a little bit of time, I've gone ahead and put the accounts in the correct order in the trial balance, and now we're just going to determine where their balances go. So we're just taking the balances that they've given us and we're putting them into either the debit column or the credit column. So again, we start out with cash. It's always going to be first because it's the most liquid assets. Our assets are always listed by how liquid they are, which means how easily they're converted to cash, and cash, of course, is cash. Okay, so our first one will be cash, and that will be a $7,000 debit balance. Our next account is an asset, accounts receivable. So again, $3,600 will go in the debit column. Equipment is an asset, and that will go in the debit column. It is $36,000. And then we get to accounts payable. Okay, so accounts payable is a liability. Remember your accounting equation. Our liabilities have a normal credit balance because assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. So all of the assets have a debit balance, normal debit balance, and your liabilities and owner's equity have a normal credit balance. So accounts payable should be in the credit column, salaries payable should be in the credit column, interest payable in the credit column, and then those are our three liabilities. Then we get to common stock, which is a owner's equity account, and that will also be in the credit column. Okay, so those are our permanent accounts. These are our balance sheet accounts, and those are never closed. But remember, we haven't closed any accounts, so all of our accounts are open. So the next thing we do is begin to list our temporary accounts. So our first temporary account that we list is dividends. Dividends has a normal debit balance. Now, the reason why is because dividends reduce retained earnings, which is an owner's equity account, which has a normal credit balance. So think of dividends, it's not an expense, but you can kind of think of dividends as having, it's a temporary account and it has a debit balance. So you can kind of associate it some with the expense accounts that also have debit balances. Your revenue account, service revenue, is another temporary account, and it increases retained earnings. So revenue accounts always have a normal credit balance. Now we have the last accounts that we list are our expense accounts. They all have debit balances, normal debit balances, because they reduce retained earnings. So rent expense would go in the debit column, utilities expense would go in the debit column, and salaries expense also. And then what we're trying to see is whether or not our debit column, which is this is the total of all the debits, equals all the credits in the credit column. And in this case, they do. Now, when you're working your own problem and you get down to the end and they don't equal, what do? Well, the first thing to look at is to see whether you have put an account in the wrong column. So just glance up through all your accounts and see, do I have them all in the right column? The next thing I would look at is, did I type in one of the amounts wrong? Because it's very easy to do. So those are the things that you can do to find your errors. Now, in a real accounting system, there could be all kinds of errors. So we're really doing this for other reasons, like we may have posted something wrong or something like that, or had a transposition of numbers. But for your homework problem, this is just a test. Do you know the normal balance and which column to put it in? So that is the conclusion of the demonstration for S2H.